Your addiction is not an accident. It is the final test your soul must pass before you awaken. Carl Jung discovered something that rehab clinics will never tell you. You are not fighting against alcohol, drugs, pornography, or food. You are in an ancient spiritual war, and your addiction is just the chosen battlefield. There is a force in the depths of your unconscious that is using your weakness as a gateway to destroy who you really are. This is not about willpower. It is not about discipline. It is about something much bigger and much more dangerous. Every time you relapse, it is not your failure. It is a calculated attack from something that lives inside you, something Jung called the shadow, and it now wants to take total control of your life. You were chosen for this test. Yes, chosen, because only strong souls receive battles of this magnitude. And the truth is this: if you win this war, you become unstoppable. If you lose, you disappear slowly until nothing remains. The question now is, are you ready to see the real enemy? There is something living inside you that you never invited in. It watches your every move, studies your patterns, learns your routines. It knows when you are weak, when you are tired, when your defenses are down. This is not metaphor. Jung spent decades mapping the human psyche and found that beneath our conscious mind lies a vast territory we never explore. In that darkness, things grow, things that have their own agenda. Most people believe they are one unified self, one person making decisions, choosing actions, living life. Jung discovered this is a comforting lie. You are a house with many rooms, and not all the inhabitants are friendly. Some of them want you to fail, some of them feed on your suffering. And your addiction is their favorite weapon because it works so perfectly. It keeps you distracted, keeps you ashamed, keeps you isolated. It prevents you from ever discovering who you truly are. The invader does not announce itself. It does not knock on your door and introduce itself as your enemy. Instead, it whispers. It suggests. It makes you believe that the thoughts in your head are your own thoughts. That craving you feel at 3 in the morning, that sudden urge that feels like it will tear you apart if you do not satisfy it. You think that is you wanting something, but Jung would tell you to look closer. Ask yourself, does this desire serve your highest good? Does it align with who you want to become? Or does it actively work against everything you claim to value? The invader knows your history. It knows every wound, every disappointment, every moment of pain you have tried to bury, and it uses these against you with surgical precision. When you feel lonely, it suggests the one thing that will make you feel even more alone afterward. When you feel anxious, it offers the temporary relief that will multiply your anxiety tenfold tomorrow. It is not trying to help you. It is trying to colonize you, piece by piece, until there is nothing left of your authentic self. Jung called this the autonomous complex, a splinter of psyche that operates independently, with its own goals, its own intelligence, its own survival instinct. Your addiction feeds this complex. Every time you give in, you're not just consuming a substance or engaging in a behavior. You are feeding something that grows stronger with each surrender. You are allowing the invader to claim more territory in the landscape of your soul. The most terrifying part is how subtle this invasion becomes over time. In the beginning, you might feel conflict. Part of you wants to stop, part of you wants to continue. But as the invader gains strength, that conflict fades. The voice that wants to stop gets quieter and quieter until one day you realize you cannot hear it anymore. You have become the addiction. The invader has won. But here is what the treatment programs and the therapy sessions rarely address. This invader is not some external demon. It is made from your own psychic material. It is built from the parts of yourself you rejected, the emotions you refused to feel, the truths you could not face. Jung understood that we create our own monsters, and the only way to defeat them is not to fight them, but to integrate them, to understand why they exist, what they are trying to protect you from, what need they are desperately trying to meet in the most destructive way possible. The invasion has already happened. The question is not whether you have this presence inside you, because you do. Every addict does. The question is whether you will continue to let it operate in the shadows, pulling your strings, making your choices, living your life, or whether you will finally turn on the light and see it for what it is. A part of you that needs to be understood, confronted, and ultimately transformed. The battle has already begun. You just have not realized you are in it yet. Stop for one moment and ask yourself, who wants this? When that craving hits, when that compulsion rises, when you find yourself reaching for the thing you swore you would never touch again, who exactly is doing the wanting? You assume it is you, your conscious self, your ego, your identity, but Jung would challenge that assumption completely. He would ask you to consider that what you experience as your desire might be something else entirely, something using your nervous system, your thoughts, your hands, to satisfy its own hunger. Desire feels personal. It feels like it originates from your core, from your authentic will. But Jung discovered that the psyche is layered like an archaeological site. The surface level, your conscious awareness, is the thinnest layer. Beneath it lie strata of older material, prehistoric drives, inherited patterns, collective memories that predate your individual existence. These deeper layers have their own desires, and they are far more powerful than anything your conscious mind can produce. When an addict says, "I want a drink," Jung would say, you need to be more specific. Which you wants the drink? The you that has goals and dreams and people who love you, the you that looks in the mirror and feels shame, or the you that exists below all that? The ancient you, the one that still operates on survival mechanisms from when humans lived in caves, and the only thing that mattered was getting through the next day. That primitive self does not care about your future. It does not care about your reputation or your health or your relationships. It only knows now. It only knows relief. It only knows this thing makes the pain stop for a little while. Your addiction latches onto this primitive desire system and hijacks it completely. It convinces your ancient brain that the substance or behavior is necessary for survival. Not just pleasant, not just preferred, but essential. Life or death, essential. This is why the craving feels so overwhelming, why it feels like you will die if you do not satisfy it. Because in a very real way, a part of your psyche believes you will die. The rational part of your brain knows this is false, but the rational part is not in charge when the craving hits. The ancient part is, and it is screaming for survival. Jung observed that people in the grip of addiction often describe feeling possessed. They use that exact word, something takes over and I cannot stop it. They describe watching themselves do things they do not want to do, make choices they know are destructive, hurt people they love, all while some part of them stands back and watches in horror. This is not poetic language. This is accurate description of what happens when desire stops being yours and becomes something that possesses you. The complexity deepens when you realize that some of these desires are not even from your personal history. Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a layer of psyche shared by all humans, filled with primordial images and patterns he called archetypes. These archetypes carry their own compulsions. The trickster wants chaos and boundary violation. The Dionysian impulse wants ecstasy and dissolution of self. The death drive wants annihilation. When you tap into substances or behaviors that activate these archetypal energies, you are not just dealing with your personal psychology anymore. You are channeling forces that have driven human behavior for millennia. This is why addiction feels so much bigger than you. Because it is bigger than you. You are not just fighting your personal weakness or your individual trauma. You are fighting patterns etched into human consciousness over thousands of generations. You are fighting the part of the human story that seeks oblivion, that wants to escape the burden of consciousness, that would rather dissolve into nothingness than face the terrible responsibility of being awake and aware. But here is the crucial insight Jung offers. Recognizing that the desire is not entirely yours is not an excuse. It is the first step toward freedom. When you understand that you are being moved by forces larger than your individual will, you can start to separate yourself from those forces. You can observe them without identifying with them. You can say, "That is the craving speaking, not me. That is the ancient brain screaming for relief, not my authentic desire. That is the complex, the invader, the autonomous pattern trying to perpetuate itself, and I do not have to obey it." The moment you create that space between the desire and your identity, you have taken back the first piece of territory in this war. The desire will still come, but now you know it is not the whole truth of who you are. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the S.I.M Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. Jung gave a name to the part of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. He called it the shadow. It contains everything you have decided is not acceptable about yourself, every impulse you judged as wrong, every emotion you labeled as weakness, every trait you deemed unworthy of your self-image. You spent your whole life building a persona, a mask you show the world, and everything that did not fit that mask got thrown into the shadow. But here is what nobody tells you: the shadow does not disappear. It grows, it waits, and it studies you. The shadow knows you better than you know yourself, because it is made of the truths you will not face. It sees through every lie you tell yourself, every rationalization, every excuse. And when it finds a weakness, it does not just exploit it randomly, it chooses with precision. Your particular addiction is not arbitrary. It is not bad luck or genetic lottery. The shadow selected it specifically because it strikes at the exact fault line in your psyche that you have worked hardest to hide. If you are addicted to alcohol, look at what alcohol does for you. Does it quiet the voice that tells you that you are not enough? Does it make you feel confident when underneath you feel terrified? The shadow knows that fear lives in you, and it knows you will never face it directly, so it offers you a shortcut, a poison that feels like medicine. If you are addicted to pornography, what need is it filling? The shadow knows you crave connection, but are afraid of real intimacy. It knows you want to feel desired, but are terrified of rejection. So it gives you a substitute that requires no vulnerability, no risk, no real human contact. The perfect trap. Every addiction is a shadow solution to a real problem. The problem is authentic, the pain is real, the need is legitimate. But instead of facing the actual issue, the shadow offers you a counterfeit solution that makes everything worse. It is like putting a bandage on a gunshot wound. The bandage is not the problem, the wound is. But you keep buying more bandages and wondering why you are still bleeding. The genius of the shadow is that it uses your own values against you. If you pride yourself on being strong and independent, the shadow will make sure your addiction humiliates you, reduces you to begging and dependency. If you see yourself as intelligent and in control, the shadow will trap you in behaviors so obviously self-destructive that your intelligence becomes torture. You will watch yourself make the same stupid choice over and over, fully aware of what you are doing, unable to stop. Your own mind becomes a prison. Jung understood that the shadow does not want to destroy you. That is not its goal. The shadow wants to be seen. It wants to be integrated. It is the neglected child in your psyche, acting out because it has no other way to get your attention. Your addiction is the shadow screaming, "Look at me, acknowledge me, stop pretending I do not exist." Every relapse is another message you refuse to read. Most people think healing from addiction means eliminating the desire, killing the shadow, achieving some pure state where they are no longer tempted. Jung would say this is exactly backward. You cannot kill the shadow. It is part of you. Trying to eliminate it is like trying to eliminate your own arm. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. The more you deny it, the more creative it gets in sabotaging you. The shadow does not play fair because you have not been fair to it. You locked it in a basement and pretended it did not exist. Now it is rattling the chains. The shadow chooses your weaknesses because it needs you to finally turn around and look. It needs you to stop running from the parts of yourself you find unacceptable. The addiction is not the enemy. The addiction is the symptom. The real issue is your relationship with your own darkness. The parts of yourself you have decided are too ugly, too shameful, too broken to deserve your love or attention. Those parts do not go away. They fester, and eventually they find a way to make themselves known. Here is the paradox. The moment you stop fighting the shadow and start listening to it, its power over you begins to diminish. When you can look at your addiction and ask, what part of me needs this? What wound is this trying to heal? What truth am I avoiding? You begin the real work. Not the work of white-knuckling through cravings or counting days of sobriety. The work of integrating the rejected parts of yourself back into wholeness. The shadow chose your weakness not to destroy you, but to show you where you need to grow. The question is whether you are brave enough to look. You have done it again. You were doing so well. Days clean, maybe weeks, maybe months. Your relationships were healing. People were starting to trust you again. You could see a future that did not revolve around shame and secrecy. And then, right when things were finally getting better, you destroyed it all. You reached for the thing that you knew would ruin everything. And the worst part is, some part of you wanted to. Some part of you chose destruction over happiness. Why? Jung would tell you that self-sabotage is not weakness or stupidity. It is a form of protection. Your psyche is trying to save you from something it perceives as more dangerous than the addiction itself. That thing you are afraid of, more afraid than you are of losing everything, is success, is wholeness, is actually becoming the person you claim you want to be. Because if you become that person, you can no longer hide behind your addiction. You will have to live fully, feel everything, take responsibility for your life, and some part of you is absolutely terrified of that. The addiction serves a function. It is not just destroying your life, it is protecting you from something your psyche has decided you cannot handle. Maybe it is protecting you from the expectations that come with success. If you stay broken, people expect less from you. They forgive your failures. They do not demand that you live up to your potential. Your addiction becomes an excuse, a shield against the terrifying possibility that you might actually have to try, and you might still fail. Better to fail because of the addiction than to fail when you gave it everything you had. Or maybe the addiction is protecting you from intimacy. Real connection requires vulnerability. It requires letting people see you, not the mask you show the world, but the actual you with all your flaws and fears and needs. That is terrifying, much easier to keep people at a distance with your addiction. They cannot get too close because you are too much of a mess. You are always one crisis away from pushing them away. The addiction guarantees you will never have to risk real love because you will sabotage it before it gets too deep. You have probably already done this multiple times. Right when someone gets close, right when they start to really see you, you relapse, you blow it up. You prove to them and to yourself that you are not worthy of love. And in a sick way, that feels safer than taking the risk of being loved and possibly abandoned. Jung observed that people are more afraid of their own light than their darkness. We can accept being broken. We have lived with broken for so long that it feels like home. But becoming whole, becoming healthy, becoming powerful, that is unfamiliar territory. That requires us to let go of the identity we have built around our suffering. And for many addicts, suffering is the only identity they have. Who are you without your addiction, without your story of struggle and pain and survival? You might have to find out. You might have to build a new identity from scratch. You might have to admit that you are not the victim of your circumstances, but the creator of your life. That is a heavy responsibility. Self-sabotage also protects you from grief. If you actually heal, you will have to grieve all the years you lost, all the damage you caused, all the opportunities that slipped away while you were trapped in the cycle. As long as you stay in active addiction, you can avoid that grief. You can stay numb. You can keep telling yourself that you will deal with it later, that you will make amends later, that you will become the person you were meant to be later. But later never comes, and the grief waits. The moment you get sober, the moment you start to heal, all that postponed pain comes flooding in. Your psyche knows this, so it keeps you using. It keeps you in the familiar hell, because the unfamiliar heaven requires you to walk through a valley of grief so deep you're not sure you will survive it. There is another layer here that Jung would recognize immediately. Sometimes you sabotage yourself because success would betray your family system. Maybe everyone in your family is broken. Maybe addiction and dysfunction are the family legacy. If you heal, if you break the pattern, you are implicitly saying that they could have done it too. You are holding up a mirror to their choices. And some part of you cannot bear to do that to the people you love, even if it means sacrificing your own life. So you stay sick to keep them company. You fail to protect them from the pain of seeing what could have been. The pattern repeats because you have not addressed the core fear. You keep trying to fix the addiction without looking at what the addiction is fixing for you. You keep treating the symptom without diagnosing the disease. And the disease is this: you do not believe you deserve the life you say you want. Somewhere deep in your psyche, there is a belief that you are fundamentally unworthy of happiness, of love, of peace. The addiction is just the enforcement mechanism for that belief. Every time you sabotage yourself, you are proving that belief right. You are staying loyal to the story you have told yourself about who you are. And until you challenge that story, until you dig up that belief and examine it in the light, you will keep destroying everything good that comes into your life. The sabotage will continue until you finally ask, what am I really afraid of? And then have the courage to face the answer. There comes a point in every addiction where a shift happens. In the beginning, you have an addiction. It's something you do, something you struggle with, but it is not who you are. You can still separate yourself from it. You can still say, I am a person who happens to have this problem. But then one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, the addiction stops being something you have and becomes something you are. You are no longer a person with an addiction. You are an addict. The distinction matters more than you realize. Jung understood that identity is not fixed. It is constructed from the stories we tell ourselves, the roles we play, the masks we wear. But once a story becomes part of your core identity, it becomes almost impossible to change. Because changing it means changing who you are at the most fundamental level. It means killing off a version of yourself and being reborn as someone new. That kind of death terrifies people more than physical death, so they cling to the identity even when it is destroying them, because at least it is familiar. At least they know who they are. When addiction becomes identity, everything shifts. Your entire personality reorganizes around it. Your friends are people who use or who enable. Your routines revolve around obtaining and consuming. Your emotions are dictated by whether you can get your fix. Your sense of self-worth is tied to your ability to manage the addiction or your failure to do so. You stop having interests outside of it. You stop having goals that do not involve it. The addiction becomes the center of gravity around which your entire life orbits. The identity of addict also comes with a strange kind of comfort. It gives you a community. Other addicts understand you in ways that normal people never will. There is a bond in shared suffering, a sense of belonging that you might not have found anywhere else. It gives you a narrative, a way to explain why your life looks the way it does. It gives you something to fight against, even if you keep losing. And in a world that often feels meaningless, having something to fight, even if it is yourself, provides structure and purpose. But here is the trap. Once you become an addict in your own mind, recovery becomes about loss rather than gain. You are not working toward becoming someone better. You are trying to stop being who you are, and that is almost impossible to sustain, because who you are keeps reasserting itself. The identity keeps pulling you back. You might manage to stop using for a while, but the identity remains. You are a sober addict, which means you are still defining yourself by the addiction. You are still letting it occupy the central position in your psyche. You have just changed your relationship to it from active to abstinent. The addiction still wins, because it still gets to be the most important thing about you. Jung would say that true healing requires not just stopping the behavior, but transforming the identity. You cannot just remove the addiction and leave a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. You have to replace it with something else, something bigger, something more compelling. You have to discover who you are beyond the addiction. Not who you were before it started, because you cannot go back, but who you can become on the other side of it. This is terrifying, because you do not know who that person is. You have to step into the unknown and trust that you will find yourself there. The moment addiction becomes identity is also the moment you start to need it. Not just physically, though physical dependence is real, but psychologically, you need it to maintain your sense of self. Without it, you do not know who you are. This is why so many people relapse even after years of sobriety. They built a sober identity, but it was still organized around the addiction. They were still defining themselves in opposition to it. And eventually, the pull to reunify with the thing that made them feel whole, even if it was destroying them, becomes overwhelming. They relapse not because they lack willpower, but because they lack a self that exists independently of the addiction. There is a concept in Jungian psychology called ego death, the death of the false self, the constructed identity that you have mistaken for your true nature. For an addict, ego death means allowing the identity of addict to die. Not just the behavior, but the entire story you have built around it. The victim narrative, the exceptional sufferer, the person whose pain is so unique and so profound that normal rules do not apply. All of it has to die, and what emerges from that death is not predetermined. It is not guaranteed to be better. It just is. It is raw, authentic being, without the armor of identity, without the protection of a familiar story. It is vulnerable and uncertain and absolutely necessary if you want to be free. The question you have to ask yourself is this: are you willing to let the addict die? Are you willing to not know who you are for a while? Are you willing to walk through that desert of identity dissolution and trust that something real waits on the other side? Or will you keep clinging to the familiar hell because at least you know its name? The addiction can only be your identity as long as you agree to it. The moment you withdraw that agreement, the moment you say, "I am not this anymore," even if you do not know what you are instead, the transformation begins, but you have to be willing to die first. And that is the test most people fail. Every battle you have fought until now has been the wrong battle. You thought you were fighting the substance. You thought you were fighting the craving. You thought you were fighting your circumstances, your trauma, your genetics, your bad luck. All of it was a distraction from the real war. The only battle that matters, the only battle that will ever set you free, is the battle for your own soul. And that battle does not take place in rehab centers or therapy offices or support group meetings. It takes place in the depths of your own psyche, in the darkness you have spent your life avoiding. Jung believed that every human life is a quest for individuation, becoming whole, integrating all the scattered, rejected, denied parts of yourself into one unified being. For most people, this process unfolds gradually over a lifetime. But for the addict, it becomes compressed, intensified, unavoidable. The addiction forces the confrontation. It drags you into the underworld of your own psyche and says, deal with this now or die. There is no middle ground. There is no compromise. You either face yourself completely or you are consumed. This is why your addiction is your final test. Not because it is the hardest thing you will ever face, though it might be, but because it is the thing that will determine whether you become who you were meant to be or disappear into the shadow of your own potential. The test is not whether you can stop using. That is trivial. The test is whether you can face the reason you started. Whether you can look at the wound underneath the wound, the pain underneath the pain, the fear underneath the fear, and whether you can love yourself anyway. The battle for your soul requires you to do something that feels impossible. You have to turn toward the suffering instead of away from it. Every instinct you have screams to run, to numb, to escape. The addiction trained you well. It taught you that pain is the enemy and relief is the goal. But Jung would tell you that pain is not the enemy. Unconsciousness is the enemy. Avoiding pain does not make it go away. It makes it grow in the dark. It makes it stronger. It gives it power over you. The only way through is through. You have to feel everything you have been running from, and you have to stay conscious while you do it. This is the crucifixion moment Jung spoke of. The point where your ego, your constructed self, your addiction identity gets nailed to the cross and dies. It is agonizing. It feels like annihilation. Every fiber of your being resists it. But on the other side of that death is resurrection. Not back to who you were, but forward into who you are becoming. The person who does not need the addiction because they have found something more real, more nourishing, more true. They have found themselves. The battle is also a battle against time, because the addiction wants you to believe you have forever to figure this out. You can quit tomorrow. You can change next week. You can deal with your trauma when you are ready, but tomorrow never comes. Next week turns into next month, turns into next year, turns into next decade. And one day you wake up and realize you have spent your entire life preparing to live instead of actually living. The addiction stole time you will never get back. The battle requires you to act now, not when you feel ready, not when circumstances are perfect. Now, with all your fear and doubt and imperfection. Now is the only moment that exists. Now is the only chance you have. You cannot fight this battle alone. Jung understood that individuation requires relationship. You need mirrors. You need people who can see the parts of you that you cannot see. You need witnesses to your transformation. The isolation of addiction is part of its power. It cuts you off from the collective, from the human tribe, from the sources of strength that exist outside your own willpower. Part of the battle is reaching out, asking for help, allowing yourself to be seen in your brokenness. This violates every rule the addiction has taught you. The addiction says hide, lie, pretend everything is fine. The battle for your soul says reveal, confess, ask for help. It is humiliating. It is necessary. Here is the final truth Jung would want you to understand. This battle is not punishment. It is initiation. In every culture throughout history, the path to power and wisdom has required a descent into darkness. The hero's journey always includes the journey to the underworld. You do not become who you are meant to be by staying comfortable. You become who you are meant to be by being tested, by facing the thing that terrifies you most, by dying and being reborn. Your addiction is that test. It is the dragon you have to slay. But unlike in fairy tales, you do not slay this dragon with a sword. You slay it by understanding it, by integrating it, by recognizing it as a part of yourself that needs transformation, not elimination. The only battle worth fighting is the battle to reclaim your own life from the forces that have colonized it, to take back your will from the compulsions that have controlled it, to resurrect your authentic self from underneath the layers of shame and trauma and protective mechanisms. This battle will cost you everything. It will cost you your excuses. It will cost you your victim story. It will cost you the identity you have built around your suffering. It will cost you the familiar hell you have called home. But what you gain is immeasurable. You gain yourself. You gain your life back. You gain the chance to find out who you really are when you are not defined by what you cannot control. The war for your soul is the only war that matters. Everything else is just noise. The question is, will you fight?